everyone, and welcome to another episode of Seasons 4 Conversations in the Future of Work. I'm your host, Rachel Cossar, and I'm really excited for today's episode. We're going to get into the nitty-gritty of organizational psychology and communications in particular, scaling team dynamics and organizational psychology. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our incredible guest, Bobbi Wegner. Welcome.
Thanks, Rachel. I'm really excited to be here.
That's so great to have you. So if you want to share with our audience just, briefly some of the main touch points of your background.
Sure. So I'm really a psychologist turned entrepreneur. So I, have a doctorate in clinical psychology. I was in my own practice consultancy for about 13 years. I started teaching at Harvard, first in the School of Education, and then now also in the Extension School teaching organizational psychology. So if anyone's seen Billions and knows Wendy Rhoades, that's really what I teach. We saw a huge market need, and we ended up building a company and a platform to really scale organizational psychology, democratizing Wendy Rhoades, who's, a high caliber performance coach, really coming from the lens of psychology, and then using AI to provide ongoing insights. So I spend most of my time building and leading groups, that company, and then also teaching at Harvard still.
Awesome. Yeah, I do love Wendy Rhoades. So democratizing Wendy Rhoades, that's a really good way of putting it.
If you know Wendy Rhoades. If you don't, then I have to describe.
Right. Awesome. Well, let's get into it.
Great.
So you've worked with companies in a variety of different ways and vantage points, right, over the past few years. So what are you seeing in terms of struggles that companies face when it comes to communication in general, but especially like internal team communication?
Yeah, my mind goes to a few different places, when we think about this. One, just the landscape of work is different now that we're in the virtual world. So therefore communication's different. And so we've really been stripped of those human touch points in the virtual space that are really, really important as humans. We're hardwired for connection. We're social by nature. We need to feel like we belong, that we're seen, that people understand us. And when we're in real space together, physical space, we can get those needs met in different ways, through casual ways. The virtual space basically strips us of that opportunity. So then, disconnection kind of comes up. People just feel like not understood or, not as connected. And a big part of that is the communication, that we aren't doing that just chit chat. We don't have that, kind of water cooler type experience. So that's one thing, is companies really have to be better at creating time to deepen, to focus on communication and deepen connection. The other piece of it is, in general, virtual or not, really people are waiting to speak rather than truly listening. And listening is one of the biggest parts of communication, or effective communication. And it's an art, it's a skill, it's something to be learned. It's not something that we're really taught. Some of us are better at it than others, but it's really important to listen and ask questions before you make any statements or give advice. So a very tactical, tangible way to think about this. And this is how we train psychologists. I still teach psychologists, but I used to be a clinical supervisor and training clinicians. Is ask two questions, open-ended. What, how, sometimes why can come off as a little judgy. So you have to be careful with that one before you make any statements, give any advice, or, because that once you make a statement or give advice, it shuts down the communication. It's sort of no longer up for discussion unless the person's going to counter. And so you want to open up the conversation through question asking.
Mm-hmm. So that makes me think a lot of some of the more challenging conversations around, giving feedback or checking in about if an issue does come up. Do you find that that's also a good structure to follow? If you were having just a regular one-on-one, or even a group meeting, if you're trying to facilitate a conversation with a group?
Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of two things that come to mind for me with that one is that 1000%. So for me, when I'm in a situation where I'm noticing there's an area of conflict, or I have to give feedback or something that isn't as easy, I notice the first step is self-awareness, noticing in yourself that something is getting activated. And then that cues me to be okay, there's a thing here. What needs to happen? And instead of just jumping into kind of defensive mode or kind of cognitive mode where I'm then kind of arguing or debating,
Mm.
which when we do that, it puts the other person in a defensive stance. It's called reactance in sort of psychobabble words, but it's sort of, thought of as like if someone pushes you, you're going to push back. And now
Yeah.
you're just talking around each other. Asking questions and cueing that you're going to listen allows a person to step back, settle into the conversation, and then actually move towards a collaborative solution. So it's really helpful to notice that you're feeling a bit of reaction, step
Mm.
back, think about kind of 2 questions you can ask. And then really one great question is like, what is our shared goal here? What does best look like? What are we even like talking about to make sure we're operating off the same kind of goal.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what comes to mind initially.
Yeah, the other thing that what you're saying makes me wonder is like you're talking about these foundational like frameworks of communication and listening and opening up, and it strikes me that those can be used just as effectively over video as they can in person. Like, would you agree?
Even more so, they're needed even more so over video
Yeah.
because we don't have the support of just the natural environment. So now we're looking in one dimension, really, just like looking at a flat screen. We're not seeing the whole body. There's limited information. And
Hmm.
so communication becomes that much more important.
Yeah, totally. Well, couldn't agree more. um, awesome. So, yes, so virtual is challenging, like, right? We
Yeah.
all know that. But like, what are some of the benefits that you see to virtual meetings from your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way, and we always talk about this. So the classes I teach, it's motivation, what drives human behavior, really in the workplace, groups and culture, really like how do you bring teams together to, work well, and then applied coaching for non-corporate, non-clinicians, more corporate people. How do you take a coaching stance to be a good leader? And so one thing we always talk about in class and with our companies is that like pre-COVID, the way we were motivating people and meeting their needs has not been updated. Systems are very resistant to change, and the way we're rewarding kind of good behavior in organizations was not mapped against human psychology and needs. Right? We see something like good behavior, we give a reward, we give more money, we do the thing, but that's not actually building intrinsic motivation. That's very
Mhm.
much a behavioral kind of intervention that is limited in scope in like success.
Yeah.
So the thing with virtual is that you're giving people, especially in terms of motivation, there's a few things that go into driving intrinsic motivation. One is autonomy, right? People have to feel like they have freedom over
Mhm.
time, team, task, different things that they choose. Virtual meetings provides a lot of flexibility while also allowing people to come together and get the work done. And so it's one way to really look at the unique needs of your team and your organization and think how to best get these business goals met, what combination between virtual, real life, like what ratio really works best.
Yeah.
So it provides a lot more of a tailored experience,
Right.
I think, for teams that will help them meet their business outcomes in a more efficient way.
Yeah, right. No, I love that. That's interesting to tie it to some of those intrinsic motivators through autonomy. What is, I cannot remember the name of the author right now, but
Yeah.
Drive.
Oh yeah, Daniel Pink.
Yes.
Daniel Pink, his theory, and this is really what we teach in motivations, how to build autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So
Right.
looking at those three variables,
Yeah.
really autonomy is super important, and
Yeah.
virtual spaces allow us to, um, provide that as leaders.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. I hope many organizational leaders are listening to this right now because it's so helpful as a reminder. Um, so it's interesting, right? You've made this compelling leap or evolution away from this clinical work into entrepreneurial work. So what are some of the challenges that you've been facing as a founder in this space?
Yeah. It's been really fun. It's a wild ride to go
Yeah.
from, I moved from a clinical space to academia to here, and it's just a totally different landscape that I love, and I would never pretty much go back. Like, it's
Mhm.
just been so fun. But some of the challenges is the helping people understand. Everyone thinks they know kind of what psychology is, but
Mhm.
they, I think helping educate people about the importance, how to use it, how it's tied to business outcomes. Most people will say, okay, I get it. Of course, communication is important, or of course, team connection is important. But how is it tied to ROI? How is it tied? Why should I spend my money here versus somewhere else? And
Mm.
so the education piece for me is just a big part of my job. And the work we do requires, pretty high level of trust. People are effectively letting psychologists, people with masters and doctorates into their teams. And so people have to know exactly what we're doing. There has to be a level of trust, and there has to be really strong relationships. So that's okay. It's just part of the work. So I don't know if it's a challenge or just something that I've learned over time, that like the relationship, even on the kind of sales partner side, is incredibly important, even though we're really built to scale and sort of be more off the shelf.
Right. Do you find that like some of these more like pop psychology, whether it's like TED Talks or personalities or whatever, do you find that that's like in aggregate helpful, or that it kind of masks some of maybe the true nature of,
Yeah, I think it's a double-edged sword. So like how
right?
we started off this conversation, those people who know Wendy Rhoades very quickly provides a cognitive schema. Okay, I get what you're doing a little
Yeah.
bit. We're not
Right.
exactly Wendy Rhoades, where really,
Yeah.
most of our people have doctorates or clinicians. They're, kind of coming from a different space.
Yeah.
And we're really focused on teams, not one-on-one. But it quickly
Right.
accelerates the conversation.
Yeah.
So that's incredibly useful.
Right.
The thing is, yeah, there's a lot of people. So this is an opportunity, I think, for us, that coaching's an unregulated field, but therefore quality control is sort of all over the map. And there's some amazing people doing really important work in the space, coaches who are public figures doing great things. And there are also some people who are like, I don't know what to do. I'm going to become a coach, right? And then that kind of can dilute how people think about what coaching is. And so the way we've gotten around it is really just hiring people with masters and doctorates, and then really focused on like psychology based coaching, which is
Right.
a little bit different.
Yeah. Wow, that's so interesting. So, in the episode before this, I had Neil Sundberg on, who used to be the director of the coaching services at Headspace.
No, no way.
So they focus on health and wellness coaching specifically, and they
Mm,
have a whole training institute and everything. And it was interesting because I asked him about, like the difference between like where some of this health and wellness coaching ends and like therapy begins, and
yeah.
it's like you have to have such a high level of awareness as a coach to
Hmm.
know where that line is. And then when you maybe need to refer to another kind of skill set or discipline or focus, right? And it's true. It's like sometimes that doesn't happen.
Oh yeah. There's a very fine line. And
Yeah.
this isn't even, there's a fine line, and even if you're not going to do therapy, you have to know when you're getting into the like approaching that line to serve the client, right? Because they
Yeah.
need help in a different way. And like, so have to know how to refer out and help them get there, which is
Yeah.
hard, because getting a therapist is hard. We although we're working with therapists
Hmm.
in groups, coaching and consulting and organizational
Hmm.
psychology is thought of as consulting. So we're
Hmm.
not bound by state licensure lines. So we can bring high quality people
Hmm.
to people all over the globe. But once they're going to be doing therapy, you have to see someone within your state who's licensed
Yeah.
within your state. So it really limits
Right.
the pool. So you
Mm.
just have to have a network of people
Yeah.
and be able to refer out. The other piece of this, even if you don't do therapy, and we worked with a military organization around this, who is very like awesome group coaching program, super fantastic. But what they were struggling with was, even though they knew they weren't going to do therapy, because they're working with a population who has a high level of trauma would come up, and then people wouldn't know how to exactly respond in a way that was really like sort of safe and effective. So we did a lot of coaching with them, kind of a train the trainer model. Like,
Yeah.
what do you do when this comes up? How do you respond? What do you say? What does follow-up look like?
Right.
How do you not shut down the conversation, but move towards it, but put boundaries on it?
Yeah.
It's just a different skill set that, clinicians are just trained in a different way.
Yeah, no, for sure. I remember I have done a lot of somatic coaching
Oh, yeah.
like body awareness work and stuff, but I don't do like somatic trauma
Oh, yeah.
work, right? And I remember at one point like being in this situation and realizing like, oh, there's some like pretty deeply rooted trauma that's like coming out right now. And I was just completely not equipped to deal with it. And, you get into a situation like that and you're just like, wow, okay, we're going to just, have to like pause and like get you to a place where you feel a little more stable. And, you might have to go see someone else about this because I was like, oh, because, the body in particular just like keeps
Oh, yeah.
so much.
The body
away,
keeps score, right?
Yeah. So I remember having that experience and being like, wow.
Yeah, I had a similar experience when I was starting out in private practice. Like, and I felt like I was doing this really great work with this woman, and was opening up, and
Yeah.
a lot of stuff was coming up, and I was just new to this space, really the trauma world at this point, and I sort of was really empathic and trying to meet her needs, and then she sort of started calling after hours, and I was trying to like, but it's just I was going too fast,
Right.
and it was actually unraveling her, which was a hard lesson learned, because there was a lot of work that had to get done to put boundaries and close it down in a different way and go slower. But something that can be seen as like feels therapeutic in the moment can actually be really unraveling to a person unless you kind of understand the landscape of trauma.
Yeah, totally. Wow. Fascinating. I mean, we could do a whole other.
And trauma in the workplace, it's not like we park trauma at the door. And I think in the education system, we've done a better job of doing like kind of trauma-informed schools and having educators learn more about this. But we haven't thought about that in terms of like leaders really yet, is really like everyone who's sitting in your room and on your team has some level of trauma, big T, big trauma, little trauma.
Yeah.
And it's the leader's responsibility to sort of understand who's on their team and how to work with everyone.
Right. Yeah. Oh man, amazing. Fascinating stuff. So zooming out a little bit, if you could have or see anything you want happen, like what is one change you would bring that you think would kind of impact most positively organizations today?
Yeah. I mean, this is literally what we're building and what we feel like you're tossing me a ball to sort of, talk about groups, but it is really truly why I've given up my practice, and it doesn't make sense from a logical perspective to deep dive in founder world when I'm like a 46-year-old woman and had a great career and all the things, but I just see a big need that is unmet in this space. And as I recently read the book Pattern Breakers by Mike Maples, who's like a VC in Silicon Valley, and he really talks about time traveling to the future and seeing what that looks like to build for today. And that really, when I look through that lens, it's like disconnection in the workplace is only going to get worse, not only because we're not going back to the office in the same way, it's like that's not happening on a widespread, like some companies will go back, teams will go back based on the needs of the organization, but it's all of us aren't going to be getting in our cars at 9 a.m. and commuting into the office.
Yeah.
So disconnection is just going to be part of what organizations need to address. But aside from that, the younger generations have a different relationship to showing up in the office. They don't want to be in the office full time.
Yeah.
I think it's like 80% of them said they would leave a job. So, Gen Zs would leave a job if they had to work full time. Some in the,
That's
live.
really interesting because I feel like it's that population group that's often like mentioned as like they would benefit the most from being in person because they're so new to the workforce. Like, not that I support that, but that's what.
Yeah, an argument. Or is it like to flip it a little bit? It's like, okay, well, how does the workforce then meet the needs of the new generation?
Yeah.
Maybe they're not benefiting because the current structure isn't set up to actually
Right.
teach them in a
Right.
way. So, aside from focusing on connection, there's a whole, there's a lot of opportunity for training, just like
Yeah.
a deeper need. And I know just, looking at our own sort of space, like workforce tech is only growing. There's a higher need, thinking about things like communication, thinking about things like connection, thinking about leadership training in virtual spaces. I think there's a real opportunity too for like peer-to-peer training.
Yeah.
Do much more kind of peer-to-peer training within organizations with senior leaders and junior people. But companies have to be thoughtful and stop playing by the script that they've historically been playing by and step back and look at their business goals and then really think about what is the landscape that best helps us meet those between, real, in real life and virtual. And then within the virtual space, what do I have at my fingertips
Yeah.
to focus on things like connection, communication, genuine relationships, leadership training, mentoring.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I mean, the organization is a live organism, everyone within it has a very active part to play. And there's just so much more we could probably get, right? From everyone.
Yeah, and like think of how cool that is. Just like I just see it as such an opportunity. Like
Yeah.
where COVID was really hard, but it reset the like everything in terms of work. So now we're actually looking at what best looks like versus just following the path of least resistance because
Mhm.
that's what we do as humans and that's what we do in systems. It's
Yeah.
like, okay, well, how do we actually optimize our workforce in a truly genuine way that
Mhm.
is matched against the psychology of both individuals and teams and groups of people?
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. Well, Bobbi, thank you so much for joining us today. How can people get in touch with you? How can they learn more about groups, follow your work?
Great. Yeah, thanks for asking. So, our website is joingroups.com with two O's. So, JOINGROOPS. I'm very accessible on LinkedIn too. I always love connecting with people. It's a big part of what brings me joy and part of my job too. So, Bobbi, Bobbi, and then Wegner with an E, Wegner. And happy to connect. And thanks for having me, Rachel. And you're doing amazing work in this similar space. And I just appreciate you inviting me on.
Well, thank you. Awesome. And as always, thanks to our audience for tuning in. We'll see you next time.